Well, good morning, Gracepoint. Welcome to the adult auditorium Sunday school class. And you in live stream, we welcome you too. Again, I have a lesson back there at the camera stand. If you don't have one, you can get one. What we're going to go over today, it's going to be our lesson. And I got two jokes for you today. One of these hits home really, really close. Well, Jim and Frances Weinberger went to a local Burger King this last week. Yeah, they did. and they saw an elderly couple come in and order. They ordered one Whopper burger, one order of fries, and one Coke with 2 cups. So when they got to their table, the man, he placed a napkin in front of his wife and one in front of himself. He then proceeded to divide the fries, cut the burger in half, and divided the Coke equally. Well, Jim Weinberger, the gentleman that he is, nearby noticed and offered to buy them another burger, another fry, and another Coke. The woman then said, "No, you don't understand. We've been married for 55 years, and all of our life we have agreed to split everything right down the middle." Well, her husband then began eating as she sat with her hands in her lap, and the gentleman nearby noticed Jim and asked the lady why she wasn't eating. Well, she replied and said, "Well, as I said before, we split everything right down the middle, and it's his day to use the teeth first." The teeth first. That's what Jim told me. That's terrible. I'm sorry. Thank you. Well, I tell you, I got one more here while we got going. And Mike Carlson and Reba, they'll probably understand this one. But there was these 2 good old boys from Alabama who loved to fish. And they wanted to do some ice fishing that they had heard about in Minnesota. So they took it off and to go try it with their boat. Well, they got to the Minnesota lake, and it was frozen nicely. So they stopped at a little bait shop down the road to get all their bait and tackle. And one of them, good old boys, told the shop owner, "Well, we're going to need an ice pick." After they got everything, they took off for the lake. About 2 hours later, one of them went back to the bait shop and said, "Well, we're going to need to purchase about another dozen ice picks." Well, he sold them the ice picks, and the good old boy left. And about an hour later, he was back at the bait shop again and said, "Well, we're going to need all the ice picks you got." Well, the shop owner, he just couldn't believe it. He says, "By the way, you guys, how are you fellas doing?" And well, the good old boy said, "Well, we're not doing very well at all right now. We don't even have the stupid boat in the water yet." Ooh. Thank you, Alabama. Anyhow, that's your jokes for the day. Thank goodness, huh? Well, it's good to have all you today. If you swam in or waded in or whatever, boy, there's a lot of water that's fell. I'm in a lot of water. And I think most of it's over with now, so it's good to see a group here, though, today. So our lesson today is called the so-called triumphal entry, which is Palm Sunday. That's when next Sunday they acknowledge that the Sunday before Easter, it's Palm Sunday. That's when Christ comes into Jerusalem. And we now come to where Jesus he's serious about his people now for the last time to try to get them on board of what his earthly ministry was all about. And it starts off, Jesus knew that the prophet Zechariah had predicted that he would be presented to Israel as their king, meekly riding upon a lowly colt of an ass. And that comes in Zechariah 9:9. And it just says, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, the king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly, and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt, the foal of an ass. So this Passover week, it would have fallen in early April, before the temperatures had reached a real uncomfortable high in the summer high temperatures. And the people, I'm sure they were feeling excited, but the warmer weather coming in like we do when spring comes. We look so forward to that. And Jesus has set his face to enter Jerusalem for his final trip. And he's focusing upon his death. Luke 9:51 says, and it came to pass when the time was come that he should be received up, he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem. Jesus is asked now 2 disciples to go fetch him a colt in the city of Jerusalem, on which he was to ride and fulfill this prophecy as we see up there in Zechariah 9:9. And it's also talked about in Isaiah 62:11. So we're going to start in Matthew here and go through this. Matthew 21:1-6. And when they drew nigh unto Jerusalem, and were come to Bethpage, unto the Mount of Olives, then sent Jesus 2 disciples, saying unto them, go into the village over against you, and straightway you shall find an ass tied, and a colt with her. Loose them, and bring them unto me. And if any man say aught unto you, ye shall say, the Lord hath need of them, and straightway he will send them. All this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, saying, tell ye the daughter of Zion, and behold, the king cometh thee, meek, sitting upon an ass, and a colt, the foal of an ass. So anyhow, and the disciples went and did as Jesus commanded them. So there we see here 2 things. First of all, it talks about 2 animals there, not just the one animal, but 2 animals. They talk about the young colt, foal, and then they talk about the adult donkey, the mother probably of the colt. And there we see a picture there of a young colt that's never been ridden. It's not supposed to have been ridden. And it shows a picture of, it shows that there's this, that's showing a stubbornness nature of the nation Israel. They were young, and they're already being stiff-necked and hard-hearted. And then you see the second animal, which is the adult colt, or the adult ass, and it represents then apostate Israel. They should know what the Messiah was that had come, and did not know that, and did not believe that, because they stubbornly were living in the flesh, and they were rejecting God. So remember, number 1, Jesus comes here not in royalty or majesty, but he comes in humiliation. This is not his triumphant entry into Jerusalem, to be offered as king, to be rejected by his people Israel, and it's all led by this jealous religious priest and leaders. I'm going to say that Christ's real triumphal entry will be at his second coming, and that will be towards the end of the tribulation. This here is his first coming, actually, into Jerusalem. And he'll be coming in that tribulation on a white horse instead of a colt, a donkey. And you can see that in Revelation 19. It'll tell you this. So number 2, this king was rejected by Israel and was again dismissed, we know in Acts, in early Acts. His entry here in Jerusalem has nothing to do with Jesus coming as a king that is found in the 4 Gospels there. But most of Christendom says Jesus is rejected and crucified. This is what they say. And God's now done with Israel. He's finished with them. He's put them away. But we, the body of Christ, become the spiritual Israel now, as they think, from this time on. The body church, which was in Acts 2. Well, the problem with that is we know that's impossible and it cannot be true. The body of Christ didn't even show up until mid-Acts, so how could it have been back there in Acts 2? They just were put away temporarily. They had fallen away, but they had not been completely, totally forgotten. So number 4, Jesus, he went to Bethany 6 days before the Passover. And he stayed, of course, remember last week, he stayed at the house of Martha and Mary and Lazarus. So they're in Bethany. And he went there to have comfort and relaxation. And on the next day, if it had been a Monday then, 5th day before Passover, Jesus and the 12 entered Jerusalem. And in Matthew, it said it would have been the 10th day in April. So we have here in John 12 and 13, it says, on the next day, much people that were come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, they took branches of palm trees and went forth to meet him and cried, Hosanna, blessed is the King of Israel that cometh in the name of the Lord. What Christ is doing here, he's just fulfilling that scripture back there in Zechariah 9:9. And he constantly was fulfilling prophecies. I don't know how many, I forget, 300 prophecies that he had fulfilled while he was here on this earth. So in Exodus 12, it talks about on the 10th day of the month, Israel goes out to select a lamb to kill and sacrifice for the Passover, which had been on the 14th of April. And we get that from Exodus 12:3, 5 and 6, where it says, Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month, they shall take to them every man a lamb according to the house of their fathers, and a lamb for an house. Your lamb shall be without blemish. A male of the first year, ye shall take it out from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it up until the 14th day of the month, same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. So there we see this was their procedure of how to handle this Passover week. In number 6, it says the problem was the religious leaders of Israel did not get it. This showed how wrong apostate Israel had become. They had come so blind in the truth. Jesus presented himself as the lamb on that very day, the Passover lamb, and yet they rejected that. Then we have Matthew 21, 7 through 9. And it says, and brought the ass and the colt and put on them their clothes. That was the disciples' clothes. And then set him thereupon. And a very great multitude spread their garments in the way. Others cut down branches from the trees and strawed them in the way. And the multitudes that went before and that followed, crying, saying, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. And they say it again, Hosanna in the highest. That word Hosanna means in Hebrew to save now, or in praising God. They always use it constantly, especially in Psalm 118. They say it several times in there. But Hosanna, that's just what that means. It means to save now. So number one, as Christ rides into Jerusalem on the ass's colt and all the fanfare, what are the 12 disciples thinking at this moment, you think? What were they, or what they weren't thinking, I can tell you what they weren't thinking. They weren't thinking that Jesus was going to experience, he's going to be arrested, he's going to be a trial on him, he's going to be tortured, he's going to go to his death, and he's going to have a resurrected body. That was not in their thinking. Their minds were, we're going to be coming to bring in this kingdom. And this is the Messiah. And how could that be that they're going to crucify now this Messiah? I'm sure that was going through their minds on this. John 12:16 says, these things understood not his disciples at the first. But when Jesus was glorified, then remembered they that these things were written of him, and that they had done these things unto him. At this moment here, they had no clue what was happening. One day, though, shortly after Christ's death, burial, and resurrection, and then the Holy Spirit coming upon them in early Acts, that they'll look back and they'll understand these things that Christ was preparing for them. These events had great significance concerning the Jewish prophetic program. So in Matthew 21, verses 10 and 11, and when he was coming to Jerusalem, all the city was moved, saying, who is this? And the multitude said, this is Jesus, the prophet of Nazareth of Galilee. One last time here, Jesus gives Jerusalem an opportunity to reconsider and evaluate who Christ was and Christ's claim, who he is. He was their God, Messiah that had come, and yet they did not get it. So next, we'll see Jesus entering the temple before returning to Bethany for that night. And it's probably due to the overcrowding in the city of Jerusalem at that time of Passover. That was the largest holiday of that whole year. And Jesus and his disciples decided just to stay in Bethany. And that's interesting because when you go to any city, like you're having a Super Bowl or anything like that, there's not a lot of hotel rooms around to get into unless you've already called ahead. And there's millions of people in those cities at that time. Well, here it's the same thing. They probably had 100,000 plus people in this little town of Jerusalem. And there was no place to stay. And plus the fact that he wasn't too fond of these religious leaders that were there heckling him. So he would go out every day at the end of the day and go back to Bethany and stay there. And then come back the following day. Because it was only a couple miles away from Jerusalem there. So in this, we're going to go into this event of the second cleansing of the temple now. And this event of cleansing the temple, we'll pick it up in Matthew, but it is also recorded also in Mark and Luke there. Matthew 21, 12 and 13. And Jesus went into the temple of God and cast all them out, all of them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves. And he said unto them, it is written, my house shall be called the house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves. So there we see, rather than being a house of prayer, they had changed this temple area into a place of corruption, greed, and filthy lucre or dishonest gain. These money changers, they had taken God's house here and misused it. And not as a house of prayer, but as a den of thieves. This is the second time that Jesus has cleansed this outer area of the temple. The second time. There was an inner court and an outer court, and this was set up in the outer court where many people could get to it. But Jesus cleansed it in John, the second chapter of John there, 14 through 16. That was the first time he went and cleansed the temple. And that was at the beginning of his ministry here on earth. And now here at the end of his ministry, he's doing it a second time. The law of Moses commanded the Jewish people to worship and to do a sacrifice, to be celebrated at this temple in Jerusalem for Passover. And as devout Jews, they would purchase a lamb or a dove or a goat or whatever they could do that they could afford to give this sacrifice. And these money changer tables, they were used to purchase these items. They sold them, and they were also controlled by the Sadducees, part of the Sanhedrin. And here Jesus, he's cleansing the temple of the cheaters here that were at those tables and those making excessive high profits from their merchandise. They were actually gouging the people as they came in to be able to sacrifice and to worship this burnt offering, a sacrificial offering. And number 4 there, it just says, Jesus justified his attack on the money changers by overturning their tables of merchandise. And he was quoting also, and it quotes these two prophets, when it said that this is what will be. There we see in Isaiah 56, verse 7, it says, even them will I bring to my holy mountain. My holy mountain is Jerusalem. And make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be accepted upon mine altar. For mine house shall be called a house of prayer for all people. And then you have Jeremiah 7:11. He says basically the same thing. He says, is this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? Behold, even I have seen it, saith the Lord. So there we have this problem, this money changers taking advantage of the situation and not using it properly as the temple was supposed to be used there. And then we have another little instance where after this has happened that Jesus is going to show a couple miracles. And he says this in 21:14. And the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. Here you just see Jesus. He's healing the blind and the lame that came to the city there, demonstrating this is what Christ was going to do and what he had been doing. He'd been doing these miracles for over 2 years, and yet they still didn't understand. And this was just another fulfillment that Christ had fulfilled. Fulfilling. And it's also a demonstration of what he's going to do in the second coming of the trib. When he comes back, he will do this healing in the blind and the lame before they go into the kingdom. So then we have Matthew 21, 15, 16. And when the chief priests and scribes saw the wonderful things that he had did, and the children crying in the temple and saying, Hosanna to the Son of David, save us, save us, they were sore displeased. And he said unto him, Hearest thou what these say? And Jesus saith unto them, Yea, and have you never read, out of the mouth of babes and sucklings thou hast perfected praise? These religious leaders and elders of Israel, they saw these miraculous deeds that he was doing. Some of the final ones he's going to do before he gets arrested, done by Christ, and that he was receiving this glory and this praise. And they did not like that at all. These religious leaders were so embittered towards Christ, but now they're going to go and take up this plot to kill him and to do this. So in Matthew 21:17, he says, And he left them and went out of the city into Bethany, and he lodged there. He left the city and went back to this home in Bethany. Christ, and I believe another reason why it was probably hard to find a place to lodge at that time. They're in the city of Jerusalem. But I think Christ came to us to a point where he couldn't stand to be around these ignorant and arrogant religious leaders. He was probably just done with them. So Jesus is demonstrating his rejection of Israel's leaders. And Jesus does not stay in Jerusalem until the night they try him, eventually leading him, of course, to the cross. Christ leaves the city every night, but returns back to Jerusalem until he gets arrested. So now we have the second event that happened while he was there. And this would be on Monday morning then, the cursing of the fig tree also. Now this here in Matthew 21, 18, 19, this is an illustration of what is happening with Israel, what's happening with Israel dispensationally and spiritually. And this event also will demonstrate God's judgment then on Israel and their spiritual barrenness or lack of spirituality. Matthew 21, 18, 19 says, And now in the morning, as he returned into the city, he hungered. And when he saw a fig tree in the way, he came to it and found nothing thereon, but leaves only, and said unto it, Let no fruit grow on thee henceforth forever. And presently the fig tree withered away. Now that's some pretty strong words there of what had happened. And the fig tree is often a symbol of judgment upon Israel in the Old Testament. And you get that out of Jeremiah, I think chapter 8, somewhere in there. But number one, Jesus and his disciples returned to Jerusalem and he became hungry. Christ, he's looking for some fruit. And seeing a fig tree, he found no fruit on it, but just leaves, right? Now, some people get upset over Christ's actions here. But again, Christ, he's just trying to teach his disciples here another lesson. And it was interesting, in my class studies I've been doing, you know, in the Bible, there are mentioned four trees that are associated with Israel. And they all represent who Israel was and had become. They're different stages of who they were. And the first tree was the olive tree. They were known as the olive tree. Well, the olive tree, it was representing Israel's spiritual life, where they were supposed to be spiritual. And then it mentions the vine tree. There's a vine tree. That tree will represent Israel as a nation. And then the third tree is the bramble tree. This one here will represent Israel under the Antichrist, where they will be at that time. And then we have this fig tree here. This fig tree here was representing Israel's self-righteous, religious life that they were living, self-righteous. And those are the four trees that are associated with Israel. And the reason I say that, because you can study that in Judges chapter 9, where it talks about those four trees and the different stages of who Israel was. Judges 9, I think it's in the middle of the chapter there somewhere. But I thought that was interesting. Number two, Christ was showing them an illustration of what was happening spiritually and physically to an unbelieving Israel. Israel was to profess to be fruitful, but a closer look revealed they were of little faith and they were fruitless. No fruit. God had expected his people. He had made them a special people. And they were to produce fruit for years and centuries and centuries. They were even supposed to go out to all the nations to provide this fruit that God had given them. And yet they were fruitless, didn't have no fruit. Number three, by cursing that generation of people, Jesus showed his rejection of them and stated that no fruit would ever come from them. And just within a few days, this unbelieving generation, they will reject Christ and even cheer on his crucifixion. Last page. Number 4 says, as Jesus says of them that their religion was empty and they had no fruit. No fruit on the vine. Israel had become a self-righteous nation. Or once a chip goes wrong in here. Yeah, apostate. Nation that used their traditional rules of self-effort, and which always, when you do that, more times than not, it'll produce failure. Matthew 20, 21, 22. And when the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, how soon the fig tree withered away. There we see, and then it says in 21, Jesus answered and said unto them, verily I say unto you, if you have faith and doubt not, you shall not only do this which is done to the fig tree, but also if you shall say unto this mountain, be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, and it shall be done. And all things, whatsoever you shall ask in prayer, believing, then you shall receive. Now that there when it talks about being able to take a mountain and put it into the sea, we know that's impossible to do, except for God. God can do it. But that's not what he's trying to come to a point here in what he was saying. He's just saying, as the disciples were amazed as how fast these leaves on that fig tree had withered and died, Jesus compares that fig tree to a mountain, showing that they could do the same thing if they had more faith. Just saying this mountain is not a literal mountain. It's actually a kingdom is what it means prophetically. In fact, 2 says that Jesus said to the 12, then, if you are different from the nations, religious crowds who don't believe in me, but you do believe, you will see apostate Israel pass away, and even this mountain. And he's talking about this type of mountain would be the city of Jerusalem, I think. Here you see in Psalm 37, sort of verifies it. Lord, by the favor thou hast made my mountain to stand strong. Thou didst hide thy face, and I was troubled. Of course, that's David talking. But here in Matthew, this mountain is the kingdom. It was the representation of a vain religious system that had opposed the fig tree, which was Christ and the promised kingdom. And there you see Satan's policy of evil was flourishing very well then. So in closing, these passages that we just went over, most people misinterpret them because it's a tremendous promise to the apostles, to the nation Israel, to have authority or to lose it. We know here that this is not for today, the dispensation of grace program. There's no way that we today can claim this promise. What promise? What promise was being claimed? It was the kingdom to come. The kingdom of heaven on earth was to come. That was the promise. And this kingdom ground here was kingdom ground and was not for the Gentiles. Our faith and now to us is just faith alone and not by works. Romans 9, 30 and 33, and this Paul talking to Israel. What shall we say then? That the Gentiles which followed not after righteousness have attained this righteousness now, even the righteousness which is of faith. But Israel, which followed after the law of righteousness, hath not attained to this law of righteousness. Wherefore, because they sought it not in faith, but as it were by the works of the law. For they stumbled at the stumbling stone. That would be Christ. As it is written, behold, I lay in Zion a stumbling stone and a rock of offense, and whosoever believeth on him shall not be ashamed. Pretty well tells the story there. Just remember, God is always running the agenda. Back then and now and in the future. God will answer as long as it's in his will. It's got to be in his will or it's not going to happen. And they believe. Under the old covenant, Israel could never perform correct godliness. Never could. They couldn't keep the law. And to that religious group that was leading his people, Christ is now saying, I'm done with you. You're not getting it. The lesson here is primarily to Israel. But we can take an application to anybody and to a people in any dispensation. For instance, the fig leaves. The fig leaves could not provide a suitable covering for Adam and Eve. Just like the fig tree could not satisfy Christ's hunger. They also, Adam and Eve, they also thought they could cover their sins by those fig leaves. Sounds like self-righteousness to me, doesn't it? And works, religion. They didn't want to do it God's way. They wanted to do it man's way. So Paul has something to say about bearing fruit in this dispensation of grace, and we know it well. Romans 6:22 says, "But now being made free from sin and becoming servants to God, you have your fruit unto holiness and the end of everlasting life." Paul tells us in Galatians 5, verses 22 and 23, he gives us what we are supposed, our fruits of the Spirit, and what we are to be for him. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness and faith, temperance, meekness, all those. And then it says at the end of those verses, there in those verses 22 and 23, the very last thing he says, "Against such there is no law." There's no law involved. I'm so glad back there in the children's, I was back there, I know Judy King, she would really stress the fruits of the Spirit to those kids back there and what they were and what they were to have and to carry with them. And she did a great job in dwelling those into those kids so they at least have an idea how to live in this world we live in. But anyhow, that's my lesson for today. And next week is Palm Sunday. So I give you a little heads up on what happened that day. But we're going to go into the upper room next Sunday and be with the disciples and understand what happened there before he left to the Garden of Gethsemane, and then he, of course, got arrested. And then that, of course, talks about Easter Sunday. So that's my thought process, unless it changes, but I think that's what we're going to do. So next Sunday, and I think we're doing the Lord's Supper next Sunday also. So that will be fitting to fit that in, to be in the upper room having the Lord's Supper there. So thank you. Any questions while I had 2 minutes? Thanks for being my scapegoat, Jim and Mike, for my jokes, but I appreciate your time, and I guess we're going to have service here in about 15, 20 minutes. Thanks a lot, guys.